Welcome, everyone, and good evening. I'm Oren Steer, Director of the Holocaust and Genocide Studies Program and Professor of Religious Studies at FIU. On behalf of Hillel at FIU, the Jewish Museum of Florida, FIU, and the Holocaust and Genocide Studies Program, it's my pleasure to welcome you to FIU's annual Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Week. Every year, we organize and present a diverse series of events during this week to educate the community and inspire thought, action, and greater civic engagement. Now more than ever, this awareness is sorely needed. Tonight's event is a discussion of the film When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit, co-sponsored by the Miami Jewish Film Festival, the German Consulate, and the Ruth K and Shepard Broad Distinguished Lecture Series. It features panelists Olga Zelzburg Alterman, Barbara Weitz, and Consul General Andreas Siegel, and is moderated by Luna Goldberg, Education Manager at the Jewish Museum of Florida, FIU. Throughout today's presentations, members of the audience are encouraged to post questions to the Q&A box that Luna will pose to our panelists, time permitting. And now, Luna.
Thank you, Oren, for this introduction. I'm Luna Goldberg, the Education Manager at the Jewish Museum of Florida, FIU, and I'm delighted to welcome our three panelists this evening, Consul General Andreas Siegel, Barbara Weitz, and Olga Zelzburg Alterman. Before we begin this discussion segment of our program, I'd like to share an introduction to the film. When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit is based on a semi-autobiographical book by Judith Kerr, a Holocaust survivor who came to be one of the world's most renowned children's book authors. Throughout her life and career, she sold over 10 million copies of her books around the world. In May 2019, she passed away at the age of 95. When Hitler Stole Pink Rabbit tells the story of a Jewish family who flees Berlin on the eve of the election in 1933. They initially settle in Zürich before moving to Paris and finally to London. The film was released in 2019, and if you have not yet had the chance to see the film, it will be available for viewing through Wednesday, February 3rd. And now we're going to show the trailer for those of you who haven't had the chance to watch.
Das ist Anna aus Deutschland. Der Flüchtling. Sie geht jetzt mit uns in die Klasse.
Herzlich willkommen, Anna.
So Angst manchmal, Papa, im Moment.
Ja, wovor denn?
Vor dem Anstecker. Macht es dir nichts aus, Flüchtling zu sein?
Doch, aber ich finde es auch ganz interessant.
Ihr Juden müsst doch überall die Besten sein, oder?
Letzten Dienstag sind sie da mit einem LKW gekommen und haben eure Sachen abgeholt.
Kannst du dich an Professor Teitelbaum erinnern?
Da haben sie ihn in einen Hundezwinger gesperrt und ihm eine Eisenkette angelegt.
Wissen Sie, man geht nicht zum Vergnügen ins Exil. Du liebst das Land, in dem du Kind warst. Du liebst die Menschen, du liebst die Sprache.
Das sah gar nicht gut aus. Ich glaube, die Mama hat geweint.
Du bist eine sehr dramatische kleine Person.
Da brennt ein warmes kleines Licht in deinem Herz, Anna. Schütze es. Lass nicht zu, dass es von irgendjemand oder irgendwas gelöscht wird.
Blöd, dass ich den Hund mitgenommen habe. Ich vermisse mein Kaninchen.
Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists this evening. Andreas Siegel is a career diplomat with a broad range of international experience in strategic, political, economic, and cultural affairs. He currently serves as the Consul General of the Federal Republic of Germany in Miami. Before coming to Florida in July 2019, Andreas headed the German Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and prior to that, served as the head of Strategic Planning Division for External Cultural Policy in the Directorate General of Culture and Communication at the Federal Foreign Office in Berlin. His career in the Foreign Service has taken him to places as diverse as Brussels, Belgium, Poland, Lilongwe, Malawi, Southeastern Africa, and Morocco, among other places. Barbara Weitz taught at FIU for 32 years and was the director of FIU's Study Abroad to Czech Republic for 23 years. She was the director of the FIU Film Studies Certificate Program for 12 years, as well as a member of the FIU European Studies faculty, the Women's Studies affiliated faculty, and the Judaic Studies affiliated faculty. Today, she lives in Asheville and has been assistant director of the Asheville Film Festival, artistic director of the monthly Israeli series, and she has taught film courses at the University of North Carolina, Asheville. Barbara has written and presented papers on film for many worldwide film conferences. Lastly, we have Olga Zelzburg Alterman. Olga is the assistant director of Hillel at FIU, where she works with Hillel staff, students, and lay leaders on creating meaningful Jewish experiences on and off campus. Originally from Russia, Olga received her master's in Jewish education from Hebrew Union College, and prior to that, lived, worked, and studied in New York, Jerusalem, Moscow, and St. Petersburg. Olga is interested in tackling the complex Jewish identities, sharing her passion for Hebrew, Israel, and Jewish literature, as well as making Judaism at large accessible and relevant to the students. So welcome, everyone. I'd like to start our discussion this evening by asking each of you about your initial reactions to the film. And maybe let's start with Olga, Barbara, and then Consul General Andreas Siegel.
Thank you, Luna. And it's very exciting to be part of this very accomplished panel. So I'll try my best. For me, it was a very enjoyable movie. And of course, when you tackle the question and think about the questions of Holocaust, you're always wondering how difficult it's going to be, how heart-wrenching it's going to be. And while I think this film has been really tender and focused on the family and didn't show outright the horrors of the Holocaust, it was still not an easy film. And as any good film, I think it keeps you wondering and internal, going on with the internal dialogue with the characters and with the main ideas of the film. So I watched it a few weeks ago, and partially in preparation for this, but just in general, kept on thinking about the characters and their lives and the message of this film. So overall, I think it was a wonderful film and it was very enjoyable to watch it.
Did you finish, Olga?
I'm done.
Okay. I have to say, I hate to throw a wet rag, but I was a little disappointed in the film. The film was beautiful. The scenery was beautiful. The accomplishment, of course, was wonderful. But I have this sinking feeling, or maybe it's a little cloud over my head, that the idea of the Holocaust, as Jews remember the Holocaust or know about the Holocaust, is being forgotten. And true for a movie that could be seen by a 9-year-old, I don't want to see emaciated bodies, and all the horrors that we've all seen in the past. But I felt it just did not really explain or show just how disorienting exile is. It's the history of the Jews, but there were little parts that did, but overall, I felt you needed to get inside the character of Anna. And I think there was more horror inside of her.
Consul General.
Certainly no coincidence that the film is being shown around the 27th of January, but I think we have to see it in the bigger context of the Miami Jewish Film Festival, or the German film series, which have been shown over the past couple of weeks. There were 4 different films with different angles and different perspectives. And this one indeed is sort of a children's perspective, which does not come too close to the horrifying pictures that we've seen when visiting concentration camps and so on. But I watched the film for a second time. I watched it sometime earlier already last year. And what struck me was that the language of Anna, the girl, well, to me today, it would seem a little bit artificial as being written by an adult to some extent, but she is at one point characterized by her father that she is a little bit has a almost adult type of language, which sort of is half credible to me, but nevertheless, she's transporting a number of very interesting experiences and messages. And well, I can very much understand sort of the feelings of the children, because I've lived through that myself during the diplomatic career, moving every other 3 years from one place another and trying to explain to the children that they will have to leave certain things and that they will have to make friends again and have to get accustomed to new languages, new environments, a new school system. That can be quite dramatic and as such, but linking that with the experience sort of the Holocaust, of the Shoah, I think it's not a film sort of, if you want sort of a comprehensive educational film on the Holocaust, I would certainly show other films.
Thank you. So I want to pick up on something that all 3 of you touched on. This film, it was based on the life of Judith Kerr, and she actually first published the book by the same name in 1971. So the book became widely read by German children in middle school as part of Holocaust education. And I think one of the reasons for this is because it didn't focus on these really dark atrocities that happened during the Holocaust, but on the journey of a young girl and her family. What do you make of the story's portrayal through the eyes of Anna? And do you think this film is meant for a young audience? Is it meant just for a young audience? Multiple generations? Are there certain scenes that stand out to you? And let's maybe start with the consul, and then Olga and Barbara.
Well, I definitely think it's a film for all generations. By the way, my daughter, who finished school like, well, maybe 8 years ago, she read it in school still. So it's not something that's really out of fashion. But I think it has a number of elements in it which are fascinating. First of all, by the intercultural experience that you have with the linguistic and dialect problems when even you speak German, but if you meet a Swiss German, it's completely different. And of course, if you're in Paris, it's also completely different. And at the same time, the film shows you a number of sort of local traditions and habits and specialties. I think that's also sort of on another level. It's educating and it's entertaining as well, because of the dramatic thread through the story. And so I definitely would think it's a multi-generational film.
Thank you. Olga?
I'm, from the very beginning being challenged, I think, a little bit by Barbara. It made it a little more interesting to think about it now. And I think that as any work of art, it has its own right? And I do think that this could be a film for the family watching. It could definitely be a film for adults and not just necessarily for children, although it is told, the narrator, the point of view of the 9-year-old girl. And one can say that either the language didn't feel really authentic. I think, and for Barbara, just the whole experience didn't feel that it really reflected the depth, of the traumatic experience that this family experienced, which I think I agree with. But I do think that in isolation, if we're saying this is the only thing that people are going to experience, or that the family is going to experience and they're going to learn about Holocaust, or want to have some understanding of it, I agree. I don't think it's enough, I do think that this is a very specific story, which unfortunately was an exception of the rule, I don't think there are many of those in which the whole family was more or less able to successfully flee and, make a living in different countries, finally settling in England. But I do think that it happened, It's not a complete fiction, It is based on the true stories. So from that standpoint, and told through the eyes of a child, and it has this sort of, I don't know, like I said, I think it has this tender note, and you can see it as the film about the family and coming of age and the road movie, all these things at the same time. I do think it's worth it, But I do think that to have a more complex understanding of this experience and of this part of history and our story, it's definitely not enough, So I think it's worthy in its own right, but not enough to have a deeper meaning and more complex meaning of what Holocaust was.
Yeah, I can't, I'm not changing from my initial view, because as we know, the Holocaust is receding into the pages of history. And for our generations coming up, or our future generations, they're not going to hear a survivor speak. We did, or I did, but they're not going to be able to know that. So how do you present the horror of having to escape, not knowing what tomorrow will bring, not knowing if you're going to be eaten by a monster, being in a place in a country where you're a stranger and you're noted as a stranger? It's like being on an alien planet. I think it had to be more about that, just as I think Holocaust history, when it's taught in schools, has to be more experiential. Just very quickly, I was teaching at NATO in Brussels from the late 60s to the early 70s. And there were many Germans, obviously, who were there, West Germans, and people shunned them. It was quite common to have people walk to the other side of the corridor. They weren't quite ready for it, and I don't think Germans were quite completely ready to confront what had happened. And now they've done it more than Americans have done it with slavery, that's for sure. And we need to keep up that pressure. It needs to be there. We don't have to shame anyone. It was the Nazis. The Nazis are not around anymore. But we need to be cognizant of the fact that even a 9-year-old is going to be looking under her bed at night, for the monster that might be coming out. And I think she had to show more emotion for the dislocation she was experiencing.
Thank you. So another element in the film that was really interesting to me was this relationship between the parents and children, their transparency as they navigate this journey and life in exile without really knowing what's to come. It was really striking to me how transparent they were with their children. What was your take on this? And let's start with Olga and then the consul and Barbara.
From what I understand about the family of Judith Kerr, there was really this sort of elite intelligentsia family of Berlin of pre-war. Her father was the journalist, the writer, and the theater critic. Her mother was a pianist. So I do think they're showing the relationship, they're showing once again, maybe it's fictionalized and it's not really how it was, right? We don't know for sure, obviously, but maybe this is, to me, it was the sign of this very educated family in which parents treat their children with respect, of building that picture or image of the family, which is unusual, right, in many regards. So for me, that was just the way it was portrayed, it was shown. Definitely, I think from a parenting standpoint of the 21st century parent, that's what I think we strive for, to really treat children with respect. Whether this was really the common practice and what was happening, you know, almost 100 years ago, I'm not so sure. I think it was wonderful, and I do think that children understand much more that often are given credit for, right? And Barbara mentioned, and both consul mentioned that 9-year-old is still a young child, but already not a baby. So I do think, and especially her older brother, so they have the capability to process a lot. And to some extent, maybe it would have been harder and more difficult whether their parents have not been that open and frank with them. Although the flip side of that, of course, it also creates anxiety and fright when you know about things that are happening, right? But I do think that for me, that was just the artistic way of showing the uniqueness of this family, of how unlike the others they were in their story, in their journey, and just the makeup of the family itself.
Consul General.
It's a difficult task for parents to on how to treat the children when they themselves don't really know what the path for the next couple of months or years will be. And indeed, transparency is and honesty is the only way to create confidence that whatever the parents are going to do, the children will not suffer sort of more than the parents anyway. And but it's inevitable that there are so many unknowns that this is a sort of a hardship experience, as is life altogether, that you have to evolve and to learn from experience. But if you have someone who guides you with at least sort of a trustworthy recommendation of what to do and to guide you around the sharp edges of the world, I think that is very helpful. But I mean, indeed, this was a well-to-do, very educated family, so probably that did not correspond to the reality of many other families, this kind of experience. But I wished that had happened. I mean, to many people in that situation, because in the end, I mean, you see the difference between the beginning of the film when Anna in particular is still very afraid of what might happen, and that she thinks she will never become someone important in life. But then after the first and second experience in Switzerland and France, when they're told they're going to London, then she's quite confident and says, yeah, well, actually we've done it before, we can do it again. And I think to give that confidence to children is a very important task for the parents.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it was very admirable. I think that's what helped the children to get through all of this horror and terrible situations that they were going through. But it's important also, to be realistic. I just remember, I'm sure I was younger than 9. My father always told us, the 3 children, Jews have to keep 1 suitcase packed in the closet. And this was in the 50s. I'm aging myself here, but it's a reality. And I think that it helped that the parents were able to take the horror, although I think there should have been a little more of it on the part of the child, but to allay the fears any way possible. I also admire the fact that the father, well, parents, but the father specifically, recognized the possibility of danger so early on. How many people that were intellectuals, that were everything he was, waited to see what would happen. This couldn't be happening, but he was prescient enough to realize, let's get out now. And very, very quickly, because this is a wonderful little anecdote about the film director Fritz Lang, who was in Berlin working for UFA, the big studios. And he had a feeling in 1932-3 that something was just possibly going to go wrong. You could tell from the films he made. But he went to his bank, tried to withdraw the money from his bank, and was told that his accounts were frozen. So according to him, he walked out quietly, walked right to the train station, and got on a train and left the country. And, you know, it's people like that that we say we're so lucky, but how many others were there who weren't?
Right. Another issue that comes up in the film is one of Jewish identity and assimilation. Anna doesn't seem to know that she's Jewish at the start, and they celebrate Christmas, although in Arthur, her father's study, we see a Hanukkah menorah. And Arthur says at one point that it is more of a German family tradition than as a Christian holiday. Their family was probably more atheist in practice. But what do you make of this? And I wonder if one of you could elaborate, if you have knowledge about Christmas as something, was it celebrated by German Jews at the time?
Well, I think everywhere it really has been. Jews, except in Israel, don't make up more than 1, 2, 3% of the population. And where it's a Christian society, how are you going to tell a child, you know, who comes home and says, where's my Christmas tree? And as the Consul General knows very well, that particular tradition, of course, did supposedly begin in Germany, Tannenbaum. And so I think that is understandable. I think it's a way of allowing the children early on to realize that they're different, but except for the very observant Jews. And I don't like the word atheist, by the way. Not atheist, non-observant, okay. They were never told they weren't Jews. I think that that's the important thing, that when it came time for that to be told, it was. My son didn't realize till he was 12 who Jesus Christ was, because he went to Jewish day school. There's something wrong with that. So it works on many different levels.
Thank you. Consul General?
Well, to me, actually, I must say, I was quite struck also by the first scenes of the film, where you see this children's carnival, and these young boys disguised, but actually, as it turns out, not really disguised, but they are Hitler youth, and they're going after the Jews. So they, at that moment, I think, at the latest, the children become quite aware that this makes a difference, being a Jew in Germany at that time, although they, of course, discover more of the horrors and more of the details only later on. But we're talking just before the Reichstag election, that is 1933, and the whole story is between, I think, 33 and 36 or something, and so this is, I mean, Kristallnacht was only in 38, so that many, as you say, many Jews weren't really aware of the dramatic nature of what was going to happen. They didn't recognize the signs. But in this family, because the father was well sort of educated and was on a sort of a social democrat side, he was quite aware, and he could also in that way, the children experienced that quite early, and maybe that helped them also understand why they had to go.
Olga, do you have any thoughts?
Sure. I think that for me, this was quite the dramatic part of the film, actually. Maybe one of those, highlights or peaks of the storytelling, simply because you mentioned before that this very subject of identity really interests me. And being born and raised in Russia, and now being an American citizen and also a Jew, how do those three play together? So I do think for that generation of German Jews, it also played out very, very interestingly, because many of them were completely assimilated. And, we see that the native language of these people is German language. And the fact that the father is the journalist and his culture is the German culture, right? Not a Jewish culture. They felt really weird when they ended up in the synagogue in one of the scenes, right? The father and the daughter. So these people identified and felt as Germans, just like I'm sure people here identify and feel like Americans, right? Are you a Jew first or an American first, right? So I do think at that point, people had the best education. They spoke the language. They were completely assimilated in the culture, and this is the sign of that assimilation when he explains that we celebrate it because it's a holiday, because it's a national holiday, not so much a religious holiday, and the fact that that's how they saw themselves. And then after 33, no matter how they saw themselves, it didn't matter at all.
I think we may have lost Olga, but she'll come back to us. So my next question is about this film and the way that it deals with the experience of being a refugee. It breaks away from stereotypes and paints a different portrait of what a refugee looks like, that you don't have to be a bad person to find yourself in a situation of having to leave your country. And do you see parallels between the story of this family and the current moment or refugee crisis?
Who is it for, Lena? Oh, she's going to come back in, I think.
It's going to come back, yeah.
Oh, I'll just take it from there. I mean, what is happening today, certainly, and those yellow inflatable rafts that are crossing the Mediterranean Sea, and most of them do hope, or many of them do hope, to get to Germany, although just to be in an EU country would be beneficial to them. But they have more of an existential problem than this family had. That's for certain. This family wasn't wondering where their next meal was coming from or what was going to happen. They weren't told that they were rapists and all kinds of horrible, horrible epithets. And so it does make a difference. However, to me, in the light of the Holocaust, it changes things. Had it been before the Holocaust in Russia, when my grandparents, were nearly killed from pogroms and all of those things were happening, yes, Jews were singled out, but never to the point of what happened in the Holocaust. So that, to me, afterwards changes the whole idea of refugee. And if it ever rises to that kind of an individual plight, I'm not even going to go there.
You want me to add something? I don't think you can talk about sort of being a refugee in general, because every refugee has an individual, of course, destiny, and it depends very much on which region in the world this is happening and from which culture he is traveling to which other culture. I mean, I witnessed myself a dramatic refugee crisis in Southeastern Africa in the 1990s. When I was, as you said, in Malawi, and Malawian population at that time was about 10 million. And they had 2.5 million people from Mozambique, who had taken refuge in Malawi from the civil war in Mozambique. In other words, 25% of the population were refugees. Just imagine a situation like that in the US or in Europe. That would be just incredible. There, it was well managed, obviously also with the help of international organizations like UNHCR, United Nations Refugee Program, and all these things, the political asylum, these are sort of international law developments which are the lessons also of Holocaust and World War II, that you have to manage refugee crises together if possible. Unfortunately, if you look in the recent past, like in 2015 in Europe, when you had sort of the beginning of the refugee crisis there, unfortunately, the lessons had to be learned again. And I think many people still haven't understood much of it. And so this will stay with us for a long time, for political reasons, for economic reasons, and for all kinds of reasons. There will always be a movement. I mean, some people who just want to save their lives, others for different reasons who want to go elsewhere, and then the receiving nation and the population has to sort of decide on how they treat that. In Germany, our chancellor at the time sort of, I think, represented a vast majority of the population to say, yes, these refugees are from a war-torn zone mostly, so they are welcome. But unfortunately, that was not the opinion of many other European leaders at the time. So we still are struggling to find a common European approach to that.
Right. So I'm going to ask one last question, and then we've gotten a lot of questions from the audience. So the last question I'll pose is around language and culture as an access point to a new society. How do we adapt? We see Anna learning languages, and even when she's in Paris, we see her win an award. What do you feel that this connection to language provides when moving from place to place? Let's start with the consul, and then Olga and Barbara.
Well, I happen to be a language student myself. I've studied languages and linguistics. So these are questions that I've been thinking about for a long time and experiencing myself. So language is a key element of culture. So if you want to be accepted in a culture, if you want to be sort of in the in-group, you have to be able to speak the language, not just a little bit, but very well. You're still being considered an outsider if your accent is somewhat different from most of the people. So you have to sort of forge your own identity in a new environment via the language. So that's a big challenge. Well, Anna in the film demonstrates that you can do it. Starting from scratch in Paris, in about 1 year, she wins the prize, I think, of the best essay, and other children and science and linguistics demonstrate this can be done, and it has happened, and it's happening everywhere. So be courageous, all the children that watch us. If you want to learn another language, it's not so difficult.
Thank you.
I do think that to somewhat it has the correlation to what Barbara was talking before about having a suitcase and having our Jewish identity portable, right? And having our tools with us, and language is one of those tools to succeed in new culture. So I think partially through this film, we see that you need it, right? Otherwise you won't be able to move forward, and how easily, or more or less easily, children are able to adapt and move forward and acquire those new languages. And at the same time, I think that, and I don't think it was shown in the film as strongly as it could have been, but once again, based on the real story of the family, and I think the father mentions it a few times, that he's so connected to the language and to the culture, which is the German culture and German language, that the more they move, the further away they get from that source for him, the more difficult it becomes to him. So I think it's sort of also fathers and sons type of situation. And we know from the real story of Judith Kerr is that she became very known and famous and successful. And her brother also, I think, became one of the few, if not the first, foreign-born judge in England. And the parents eventually were not able to realize themselves in Great Britain, right? So while children were really able to flourish and shine and be successful, it also shows that this drama that could have been even probably stronger in the film, or just we could have given the indication that this would happen while children are growing and becoming very successful and really do well. For parents, the horror of that, right? And there wasn't real horrors in that film, but the real horror and the drama of their life is that the further away they get from the source of their soul and their career and their identity, the less attached and less successful and less accomplished they feel. And we know that this is oftentimes the case with many immigrants and refugees, especially the older ones, that not having the language, not having the tools to adjust and to adapt to the new society, people become depressed and they cannot really cope with the new reality, which in big part, just like Consul said, comes to us through language. Culture comes to us through language.
And language is part of culture. It can't be separated from it. And as the Consul General said, I also have a degree in languages and linguistics. So
wow.
There is a certain age at which the brain starts to analyze language. And as soon as it starts to analyze language, it becomes more difficult to learn. And luckily, children under 10 years old are just absorbing rather than analyzing it. So it was easy for them. And we know how adults find it very, very difficult. They have to work at it very, very hard to be able to fit into the culture, to be something different from what they had been, to speak a language that is totally different from what they have known. It's a whole different level of acculturation, if you will.
Thank you. So we're going to move into the segment of questions from the audience. We've gotten so many, and I'll try to also direct them to you so that we can make it through most of these. So I have a question which I think would be most appropriate for the consul. As was noted, with the death of living survivors, going forward, how would you treat the issue of rising right-wing populism, especially in Europe, and how do you go about mitigating the issues, especially in younger generations?
Well, Holocaust education is an extremely important issue, I think, anywhere you look, in Europe certainly. So awareness raising about what has happened. The witnesses, of course, they have shared their experiences, which was or is still a very, very important sort of impression that it can make. And but we have to continue that, and we have to prevent obviously also all kinds of distortion and denial of the Holocaust, which you can observe in social media and so on. And that's why Germany just has still the presidents of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and also just had the presidency of the European Union, promoted a number of initiatives in that area. It is, I think it's a very, very difficult task. And speaking from my own experience, having seen, first of all, having had, for example, almost 2 school years where we learned about the Third Reich. I'm not quite sure whether that is taught in that intensity still today, but that raised sort of my awareness definitely at that time, and a number of visits to different concentration camps obviously is also a horrible experience which you'll never forget, and that will always tell you have a responsibility to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Thank you. I'm going to combine 2 questions, and Olga, you and I discussed this briefly. Barbara, if you'd like to join in, please do. So an audience member asked, I wonder how you see this movie compared to others that are also centered around kids, like the film Life is Beautiful. Another parallel film that's been mentioned is Jojo Rabbit, the satirical film where it focuses on this young German boy whose mother is hiding a young Jewish girl in the attic. So maybe let's start with Olga, and Barbara, if you have any thoughts, please chime in.
Well, I definitely think that this is an interesting and quite known decision of the director to tell the story from the angle of the young child, which gives you a little bit different perspective, how we see things, right? How we feel them. And I think it has its advantages and disadvantages, but definitely makes it unique, and it makes you think about the story in a way that you haven't thought about it, right? Right now, I always think about certain things as a parent, and before I was a parent, it just didn't occur to me. And now I think about my own children, how they would have, God forbid, perceived certain things, right? And I do think that this allows me to connect as a viewer of the film, as the person who processes this information. I think this is definitely a valuable tool, right? But I do think that the story would have been very different would the story been told from the father's perspective or mother's perspective or Rabbit's perspective. There are all these tools that directors can use to make you really relate to the subject. And I do think that this is definitely something that, as we see it from the films that you have mentioned, been used a lot simply because it's so effective.
And I do want to just jump in with one thought. What to me is key is education. So while the films are told from different perspectives, from different countries, I saw a Greek Jewish film yesterday. It's still, you are learning. you are learning what it is to either be Jewish or what happened to Jews or to anyone who is treated as the other or the outsider. And I just can't stress, of course, I've been a teacher for 40 years. So, you know, I can't stress enough how important education is.
Thank you. This next question comes from the Executive Director of the Jewish Museum, Susan Gladstone Pasternak. And she writes, this story is written by the adult version of the girl in the film. So as an adult, she must obviously have had an appreciation of the fact that her parents got her out of Germany very early, and she is proud of her ability to adapt. Is this not an important and appropriate way to view the film? A woman writer who is proud of her ability as a child to be a successful, adaptable refugee. Fair game. Anyone can take this one.
Okay, I'll jump in here because yes and no. We also have to put it in the context of the times when she wrote the book in the early 70s. That's what I was alluding to before about German culture in particular, but all of Europe. They were still dealing with the trauma at that time. And I just totally believe that had it been written now, and that's why I was a little disappointed in the film, because it was made by a wonderful female German director, and I was disappointed that she wasn't bringing more of her 2020 perceptions to the film. And to me, it looked like a film from the early 70s. Let's not, you know, we can't anger the Germans. They're on our side now. We have to be very careful. And to me, she pretty much adapted it in that manner to the film.
Okay. And I think it's also, as an educator that works specifically with children, I think it was beautiful to have this perspective that isn't very common and is very accessible to youth, because these atrocities, sometimes you need that starting point. So even as a way to approach these difficult topics, I do applaud the filmmaker. Now, we have another question, which I didn't know of before this law. The question is, one of the only countries that allows people who do not speak the language of the country to become citizens is the USA. Do you feel that because they did learn, they could adapt better? And they asked, do you know of other countries that do not have this law? That you must.
USA does not do that. And I know because I am currently Zooming. I am tutoring many immigrants here in the Asheville area, mostly from Mexico. And they're all trying to get their green card and their citizenship. And in order to get their citizenship, they don't have to speak it perfectly, but they have to speak it. And they're asked orally, written, and to converse. In fact, one of my immigrant women is going on February 4th for hers, and we've been going like crazy to get her up to speed.
So if I might chime in, I'm giggling because I became a citizen in September and I had my test in July. So this is very fresh type of experience for me. And Barbara is absolutely right. Everything is conducted in English. The interview is conducted in English. You're supposed to pass a civics test and history test and language test, which in writing, and also talk about it, and everything is in English. I do think that there are many tools that people are helped often to do that. So I do think if somebody really believes that they want to go this route and become a citizen, I think there are opportunities, and Barbara just expressing some of them to do that. But I do think that, once again, it comes back to the value of language. Why is it important to speak the language of the country in which you live? What doors does it open? And education, right? We're all coming back, we're all educators, we're all coming back to this question of the accessibility, and we always make these choices for ourselves and for our children. What does access to language give you? What does access to education give you? And future for the children. So I think that there are many countries I know have very similar tools. I know that European Union has also language schools and opportunities for the refugees and immigrants to learn and to excel in a new language. It takes perseverance, and I think, you know, really caring for the cause and then wanting to do that. And it's not easy, especially for older people, but of course, without it, I don't think you can be ever fully integrated in the society.
Well, I think it's really in the interest of everyone to push language learning, even though it may appear difficult in the beginning for those who are concerned. But it's in their interest because they can communicate better in the new society, and it's better for the receiving society because they can better understand what the origins and the problems of the people who are coming are. We have the lessons of the 1960s or so, at least coming, like for example, the Turkish so-called guest workers coming to Germany, and there this principle wasn't applied very seriously. And now you still have today sort of ghetto situation or silo situation where, as you can find here in Miami, by the way, as well, of people not speaking the local language, and that creates difficulties of all kinds.
Absolutely. I want to thank our panelists and everyone who submitted questions. Apologies if we did not get to them. I think that only speaks to how interesting of a film this was and how many questions have come up because of it. If you have not seen the film, we'll drop a link in the chat so that you may. And I'm now going to hand it over to Oren to close the program. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Luna, and thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and thank you so much. This program just flew by, and it was really quite enjoyable to see you all bantering about. I want to thank specifically our speakers, Olga Zelzburg-Alterman, Barbara Weitz, Consul General Siegel, and Luna Goldberg. And I want to acknowledge our co-sponsors, the Miami Jewish Film Festival, the German Consulate, and the Ruth K and Shepard Broad Distinguished Lecture Series. As Luna mentioned, if you haven't yet seen the film, and of course now you want to more than ever, we're going to post the link right now in the chat for everyone. Please copy it so you have it accessible after the program is over. I want to invite everyone to join us at 5 p.m. tomorrow for the last event in this year's Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Week. A virtual community Sabbath gathering, Shabbat of the Living, co-sponsored by Miami's Leo Martin March of the Living. You can find registration details and more information in the link that hopefully one of my colleagues will post in the chat right now for Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Week in general. And thank you again to our speakers and to our wonderful audience, and goodbye.
Yo creo que ya te lo pillaste.